Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud at VMSPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, and on Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. Oh yeah, we're also on YouTube, but the URL's really weird, so just go to YouTube and search for Virtual Memories Show, and you'll find the last 50 or so episodes there. You can support this podcast and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSPod and set up your level of support. Every week you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my monthly bonus podcast. Well, okay, actually it's quarterly now, but anyway, it's called Fear of a Square Planet, and it features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Now, last week I dropped in on my local library. I do that every so often to check out the DVD selection for ripping. I don't actually watch DVDs. I don't actually watch movies, but I rip DVDs into this giant library of movies that I have here at home. Someday I'll get around to watching them. Anyway, I also pick up interlibrary loans for research, look at new book releases for potential pod guests, etc. The point is, I actually go to my local library. This time around, I asked the clerk whether one of the administrators was in, because I wanted to pitch her on the idea of holding a series of live Virtual Memories shows at the library. The clerk and the administrator both were really into the idea, it seemed. So I'm hoping it progresses with their board. We could figure out a bi-monthly or quarterly schedule and bring authors and artists out from, well, probably from New York City, to Ringwood, New Jersey to record conversation with a live audience, make it a little cultural thing in my hometown. It's this idea I've had for a while now, but I just kind of let it lie fallow, but I decided to follow up because of this week's guest. Now, Kyle Cassidy is a return guest to the show. He first came on way back in 2012, where we talked about mainly his photojournalism on gun culture in a book called Armed America. And that conversation was 2 days after Newtown, so the tone was pretty weird all around. But this time, he's got a new book that you guys ought to love. It's called This Is What a Librarian Looks Like, a celebration of libraries, communities, and access to information. It features photos and interviews with a ton of librarians, along with essays by Kyle about some unique and out-of-the-way libraries, as well as essays from a bunch of authors and artists about the importance of libraries in their lives. And these aren't just run-of-the-mill authors. These are Neil Gaiman, Cory Doctorow, George R.R. Martin, Amanda Palmer, Jude Devereaux, and others. It's really a wonderful book. I enjoy the living hell out of it. And it put that live show at the library idea back at the forefront of my mind. You'll come away from that book realizing how important libraries are, what a place of community they are, the idea that they serve people who are different than you, maybe, in your community. So my thought is, if I can bring pod guests out there and do live shows and get people to get to meet these authors, maybe they'll pick up a book they wouldn't have otherwise picked up, Anyway, This Is What a Librarian Looks Like has wonderful photos, great text, and it'll help remind you about the civic structure that we tend to take for granted. Go buy it. Maybe buy a copy for your local library, too. Now, caveats for this one. I was sort of vocally and mentally burned out. I'd had a 2-hour, not quite shouting at someone meeting immediately prior to this. See, this was all down in Philadelphia, where Kyle lives. And I had a business meeting with someone who came up from Washington, over at 30th Street train station, and it was somewhat contentious. And then I headed over to Kyle's to record, and I probably should have reversed the order of those, but that's just the way the day worked out. Also, the other caveat is that Kyle's cat, Roswell, who's somewhat legendary with anybody who follows Kyle, climbed up on the table and began nosing the mics a couple of times. He also purred right into them at a few points, so you're going to hear this sound in the background. That is not something I can isolate and eliminate. But it's Roswell, so he adds character to everything. Here's Kyle's bio. Kyle Cassidy has been documenting American culture for more than 2 decades. He has photographed goths, punks, cutters, politicians, metalheads, dominatrices, scholars, and alternative fashion, in addition to less prosaic subjects. In recent years, his projects have extended abroad to Romania, where he captured the lives of homeless orphans living in sewers, and to Egypt, where he reported on contemporary archaeological excavations. His publications include several books on information technology, as well as a regular appearance as contributing editor for Video Maker magazine. His Photo a Week blog, www.kylecassidy.com, was one of the first photo blogs on the Internet. His work has appeared in the New York Times, Barron's Financial, Photographer's Forum, Asleep by Dawn, Gothic Beauty, and numerous other publications. And now, the 2017 Virtual Memories Conversation with Kyle Cassidy. So libraries. You got a new book out. This is what a librarian looks like. Walk through the origin of it for me and your own history with
Yeah, sure.
Libraries.
In January, it was January of 2014, a librarian contacted me on Twitter. Her name was Naomi Gonzalez, and she said, "Librarians are going to be in your town. P.S. We are very photogenic." So I wrote back and said, "Oh, I'd love to photograph librarians. Can you hook me up?" And she got together a group of about 30 librarians who I photographed when they were in town for the American Library Association. I photographed them on the last day of the convention. And I interviewed each of them about some aspect of librarianship. I said, if I could put you in front of 50,000 people, what would you say about librarians and libraries? And Slate magazine published that article in April, I think, and it went instantly viral. The second it got published, it just took off, and it stayed in heavy rotation as their number one story for a week. Millions of people saw it rather than 50,000 people, and people across social media started sharing their stories of librarians that had meant something to them in their own hometown libraries. And there were some criticisms of it, and the most legitimate, I thought, of those was that I hadn't got a big cross-section of librarians. I'd photographed.
It was a regional convention?
No, I'd photographed 30 people. Mm-hmm. And some people didn't see themselves reflected in those 30 people. Okay. So I launched a Kickstarter, which was funded almost instantly again, I think within 24 hours. And I set off on the goal to photograph 100 more librarians. And I ended up photographing 350 librarians. And sometime along there, Hachette decided they wanted to make a book out of it, which is the place that I thought that it always belonged anyway. And so now it's out.
And what was the interviewing process like? At what point was there any feedback for you in terms of librarians usually say this, so I'm going to ask them something a little bit different?
No,
or was it a basic question each time?
It was the same set of questions. I didn't have a particular question. I said, you can answer any question that you want. And some suggestions for a question that you could answer are, how can people help libraries? What do libraries need? What do you do that's special? Tell me something about your library. So something like that. And I basically stuck with the original plan, which was if I can use my megaphone to get your words to somebody, what would you say? Mm-hmm. And so it was very open-ended, and people talked about different things.
And what did you learn?
That libraries have changed a lot since I've been away. Mm-hmm. I depended on libraries when I was in college, and after that. And in the intervening years, I had drifted off. I got an Amazon Prime account, and I thought, somebody will just deliver a book to my door for $4. It seemed, at that point, time had become more of the operating factor than money in day-to-day life like that. So it was easier to just buy something for me. And I realized that libraries had sort of, through an inattention on my part, had stagnated in my mind as to what they were, what they did. And the library that my mother used when she was in college was very similar in many ways to the library that I used in college years later. But the library of the past 20 years has been evolving leaps and bounds in directions dictated by technology. So my library, for example, and I didn't realize this at the time, loans out ebooks and audiobooks. And there are apps you can get on your phone and download books from your local library onto your phone and your digital devices. Libraries are housing maker spaces. They will buy big ticket items that you might want to use but not be able to buy yourself, like a 3D printer. There was a library, which I profile in the book. There are 10 chapters in the book about individual libraries or librarians, as well as everybody's picture and quote.
And the world's awesomest bookmobile.
Yes, the world's awesomest bookmobile, which is actually a library that serves, I think, 10 towns in Montana. But this one library is in Massachusetts, and the librarian realized that the town owned a sliver of beach, which no one had used for 20, 30 years, and it had become overgrown. And she thought, well, why don't we do something with it? And she started a kayak loaning program. So if you happen to live in Shutesbury, Massachusetts, and you would like to go kayaking on the lake, but you don't want to buy a kayak, and you don't want to put a kayak on your roof of your car and drive it to the lake, you can stop at the library, use your library card, check out a kayak. They will give you a paddle, a life jacket, and a key, and you go down to the lake, unlock your kayak, paddle around, drop the key off, and return the paddle and the life jacket. So things like that I hadn't thought of. In fact, one of the first librarians that I interviewed was from Alaska. And this is the first 30 minutes of me talking to librarians. She mentioned that her library had the only internet connection in her entire town. So if you wanted to buy a book from Amazon or a flower pot, you had to go to the library to do it. And that's something that is not as uncommon as I would have thought. In fact, the M.N. Spear Library in Shutesbury, when I went there, the parking lot was filled with people in their cars using the library's Wi-Fi and typing on their laptops. The library is very small. It only has 2 chairs inside it, but people sit in their cars and work because they don't have internet access at home. The town's relatively remote, and they don't have cable out there. So another thing that's very popular in Shutesbury are DVD collections. So
no streaming video.
No streaming video, right.
A number of the portraits and quotes seem to really play up the class division aspect of this. Even there's a library that's thought to be in a relatively affluent area, but they realize that there's people we can still serve, even in this area. How conscious were you of that as things were progressing with the book? The sense that these were community centers, and also for people who just, like you say, aren't as wired as the rest of us.
It became apparent that the library is one of the last, if not the last, safety net for people who have fallen through all of the other cracks. One example of that is the Central Library in Los Angeles. One of the librarians who's profiled in the book, Candace Mack, realized that a lot of the children who are coming to her programs didn't seem to be eating regularly, and she wasn't sure if they were homeless or just somehow food insecure, especially during the summer when they weren't getting lunch at school. So she started a program called Lunch at the Library, so that she could ensure that the kids who came to the library were getting at least one meal a day. And there are other programs that the Los Angeles County Library offers. One is called the Path to Citizenship for people who want to become American citizens. And the other one is a very popular GED program for people who want to either finish high school early or who didn't get a chance to finish high school before and want to get a GED. So those are 2 or 3 programs in one of the most beautiful and wealthy library systems in the country. The central branch of the library is like a cathedral to learning. It's vaulted ceilings and multi-floors and glass windows and wonderful escalators and artwork, and it's serving an enormous cross-section of people in Los Angeles. And all libraries are like this to an extent, in that they form to fill the needs of their constituency.
But we're in an era of austerity where, we need to cut back on X, Y, and Z, and things like that tend to be the, I think you've mentioned it a few times in the book, the vote for funding X goes fine, vote for funding the library. Even in our town, northern New Jersey, where I've lived all my life, it took quite a long time for them to finally move the library out of the little tiny building it was in into a decent location now.
Yeah, I should mention too that there are a number of essays from authors.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Authors in the book, and that the particular thing that you were mentioning about the votes for libraries was something that George R. Martin brought up.
Yeah,
that he sees a number of bills on the ballot, and there'll be a bill for a bridge, and that will pass, and there'll be a bill for a senior citizen center, and that will pass, and there'll be a bill for the library, and that one invariably will not pass. Right. So that was an observation that George made.
Yeah, how tough was it? Oh, he's going to be nicely purring into the microphone. That's great.
This is my cat Roswell, who was participating.
How tough was it getting some of those authors lined up? Or was there anyone you had to browbeat to, you said you were going to be in, can we...
There was no one I had to browbeat, which I think speaks to the importance that libraries have played in the lives of authors. Almost all of them said that they wouldn't be where they were. They wouldn't be who they were. They wouldn't be writers if it hadn't been for the library. In fact, since we're talking about George R. R. Martin, I photographed him and talked to him in Kansas City, Missouri, which is the hometown of Robert Heinlein. And George mentioned that when he was a kid growing up in Bayonne, New Jersey, he read all of the Robert Heinlein books in the library, and that's what made him want to become a writer. And when he was in Kansas City, Missouri, he went to visit the library there, where Robert Heinlein had written in his autobiography that he had read all of the books about astronomy. And so George walked down the aisles that his idol had walked down. And in terms of the library, it seemed to have come full circle that now George is one of the most successful writers in America, and he owes it to a library and to an author who also owes his success to a library.
Although he did point out that one of the influential Heinlein books wasn't actually in that Kansas City library.
He did.
Yeah. Becomes that inclusion principle, I guess, where it's always tough to figure out what to keep as inventories keep growing.
Well, and that is the job of a librarian, to figure out what books are going to serve the community best. And the library that library in particular does have a number of Heinlein books digitally, which is very futuristic.
Do you find yourself visiting the local library more often since you started this?
I have been using the Overdrive app an awful lot to take out ebooks and audiobooks, and I have borrowed camera equipment. I borrowed a 360 VR camera from the library and shot a video for Amanda Palmer with it. and she, on the spot, wrote a song called "Libraries Are Awesome" and sang it into the camera.
360 degrees.
In 360 degrees.
We'll talk about changing photography technology after, but do you have a author or book at the beginning, the way Martin had Heinlein?
Oh.
Or at least something you remember taking out once upon a time that, in my case, it was Donald Westlake books. So that was far too young to take out of the library, but for some reason they didn't really pay attention. But.
Well, there are a number of books that I read as a child that influenced me. And a lot of them came from Mrs. Riddlefino, who was the librarian in my middle school, who knew what I liked and suggested other books like it. And that's where I discovered the Black Cauldron and the Book of Three, the Lloyd Alexander books. And Mrs. Riddlefino suggested that I write Lloyd Alexander a letter, and I did.
Yeah.
And he wrote back the next day. And that was inspirational to me.
That sense that writers were actually human beings who responded to things.
And she encouraged me to apply for a program called the Young Authors Conference, which is where you write something and then you go to a conference where there are actual, real, bona fide living authors who you can talk to about their work and their careers and what the nuts and bolts of their job are, and get your work looked at. I was in 4th or 5th grade, maybe 6th grade at the time, but that certainly had a huge influence on me. I remember meeting a guy named Larry Cuddlecop, and I haven't thought about Larry Cuddlecop until right now, who had written books about UFOs and the paranormal. And so my friend Kevin and I had read all of Larry Cuddlecop's books. And somehow Kevin recognized him as we were walking down the hall and said, "That's Larry Cuddlecop."
Showing more enthusiasm than anybody else had ever shown at seeing it?
Quite possibly. And I was stunned. And I asked him if he would autograph my book, which was the book that I was bringing to the Young Authors Conference. And he said, "You should autograph your book." But he autographed my book anyway. But meeting him in that hallway there, an author of a book that I had read, who was a real person walking around, certainly inspired me to continue in that direction.
Mm-hmm. I don't think we talked about it when we talked in 2012. What was the experience like of seeing your first book?
My first few books were kind of they were technology books, and they didn't come about in the traditional way, so I didn't see them in a bookstore. But when Armed America came out, I remember having worked on it for so long, and the hype was so huge about that book at the time. It had been months of just an insane amount of attention, and I saw my first copy of it at the Book Expo in New York, and it was before the Book Expo actually opened, and they were setting up booths, and my publisher F&W had a huge booth set up, and I think it was the president of the company who saw me there and came over and said, "I have the first copy of your book." And she handed it to me, and the world stopped. And it was the greatest experience. One of the greatest experiences of my life, actually, seeing something that I'd worked so long and so hard for and had been so heavily anticipated, seeing it as a physical thing. So that was...
Notwithstanding the audience vibe, simply your own experience with it, getting to see it.
Yeah, that was spectacular. Because I think one of the things that you do when you write a book or work on any project like that is that you're taking part of your life and you're shoving it into a spot, and at some point all of that life comes back to you when that project becomes real. And then there are other times that it doesn't. I mean, there are projects that I've worked on for years that have, that have, not turned into anything. So when one of them does turn into something, you get all that energy back.
Well, I do like the arc of your big published works being, gun culture, war tattoos, and librarians. I think it's a nice, through line, I guess, of some kind.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's all my work has been kind of a love letter to America, because they're also in that mix that people haven't seen because they have not yet come to fruition. There's a book on roller derby players, and there's a book on science fiction writers in their homes. So,
and you were doing some work around the fracking.
Yes.
The oil workers.
Yes, I've been photographing oil workers in North Dakota for a few years.
And do you find something particularly American about it all? Or is it just this is my country, this is how
it's where I live, right? If I was, I don't think that I'm qualified to write, a love letter to France.
And actually, let me ask the Kyle written sections of the book, balancing that with the photography. How good do you feel? Good do you feel about yourself as a writer?
I once read a review of my work that said Kyle Cassidy is a good writer, but a mediocre photographer. And I thought, I'll take that.
He likes my writing.
Yeah, I've always thought that I am an artist who sometimes uses a camera. So I think my writing can be fairly solid. The introduction to Armed America I am quite fond of. I think I did a good job on that. And the 10 chapters in here, it wasn't my idea to put those in. It was my editor, Becky's idea. There should be in-depth looks at some librarians, and I'd had a much more Spartan idea of what the book should look like. I thought, my job is only to amplify the voices of librarians, just stay out of the picture.
The cliche is that they're always shushing us. But I know everybody's going to make that joke on your publicity tour.
Then I will need to come up with a good retort for it.
See, I'm just preparing you. So. But they had the idea of having these segments.
Right. So they turned out very well. So there are 10 chapters on a library or a librarian doing something which seemed extraordinary to me, but to most librarians seems pretty ordinary because it's what they do every day. It came out pretty well.
What'd you learn about the split between knowledge and information?
Well, we are drowning in information, as Cory Doctorow said in his essay in this book. And the problem, one of the biggest problems that we have right now is sorting through the amount of information that we have. We have all information available at all time without regard to not just the place that it belongs in, but its veracity as well and its context. So one of the things, in fact, to quote Neil Gaiman, that Google can give you 100,000 answers and a librarian can give you the right one. And what librarians do many times, the terminal degree that a librarian gets is an MLIS, a Master's of Library and Information Science, which is very much a technology degree as well. And what librarians are trained to do is to help people sort through information to create knowledge and understanding where particular bits of data belong. In fact, I was talking to somebody yesterday about Gulliver's Travels, which we had read at some point. But Gulliver's Travels is extraordinarily topical, and it's about things that were happening during Swift's lifetime. There are many political jokes in there, and it would be like somebody 300 years from now reading a are watching an episode of Saturday Night Live, right now about the Trump administration. Like, they wouldn't understand what
You're being optimistic they'll be around in 300 years, but yeah, go on.
That the jokes that Swift was making are jokes that we won't necessarily get. So we have the information. You can read the words off of the page, but you need, at least I need help in figuring out what those jokes mean. And that's being able to associate the right types of information together to create knowledge.
You took library vacations as part of this?
Yeah.
You mentioned that your wife was amenable to
she was, yeah. So,
but how amenable? Really? I'm kidding.
She went to all the libraries with me. So, yeah, she would say, "Oh, I want to go to, do something," and I was like, "All right, we have to go to the library there."
What was the furthest you traveled for this book?
Oh,
I mean, you have California, so that's kind of a
I didn't leave the continental United States, but I went all the way to the other side of all the way to the other side of the country. California is about as far as you can get from Philadelphia and still be in the continental U.S.
Emotionally, sure. Favorite one that you visited? Well, I know that'll make the other ones feel bad, but it's just us.
It's hard to say. I mean, I tend to like small things. I liked the M.N. Spear Librarian, Shutesbury, which is one of the smallest libraries of its kind. It's one room. They were trying to get a bigger library, and half of the town was very much against spending any money to get a bigger library, and the other half was very interested in getting a bigger library.
Is the one that had the Simpsons-esque vote.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a great chapter in the book. So.
Yeah, it is as though a movie plot had been penned by terrific authors. There was an offer from the state to give the town X million dollars if they would raise X million dollars as well, and to do that they would have to increase taxes Y amount. So there was a huge fight over it. Everybody in the town got riled up. It got to be so bad that the principal forbade school children to talk about it in school because fights would break out. Parents were yelling at each other. They had a vote. Everybody in the town came out to vote. It had a huge voter turnout for this town ballot, and it was a tie.
Yeah,
and they had a revote, and one side won by 2 votes, and there was an immediate lawsuit to cast out 3 of the opposing ballots because somebody had spent, so many days in Florida, and therefore they were ineligible to cast a local ballot. And then the other side said, well, we're going to challenge, Fred Smith, because Fred Smith, doesn't actually live in this town. He lives somewhere else, and his ballot had an X in the spot where you're supposed to put a Y. So it was these back and forth legal battles that kept everybody on the edge of their seats for months while this went on. Eventually, to spoil the chapter, they did not get the new library. But I really liked what they were doing with what they had. And I liked the tenacity that they had. Like, we'll fight again.
Yeah, they actually care about their library.
Yeah, so that was nice to meet those people who are really fighting those battles.
Where do you stand on late fees?
Amy Dickinson, the advice columnist from the Chicago Tribune, and wait, don't tell me panelist, wrote an essay for this book about late fees. And she had a very good point that late fees are preventing people from using the library. And she went to her local library and said, what are all the late fees of everybody in town? And they told her, and she paid them. And she has become a proponent, and I think she is not alone. There are many librarians, too, who are in favor of waiving late fees if people return books. Librarians don't want to keep people from
And
books.
again, it brings up the class division aspect again. A minor library fee to U or B actually means something to someone less advantaged. Did you ever run up giant late fees yourself?
Yes.
Do you remember a book that you're like, oh my God, I can't even return this because they're going to kill me?
I still have it.
Nice.
I paid $150 to replace it.
Out of sheer embarrassment?
Out of sheer embarrassment. And
what book is it? You can tell me.
It's The Letters of Emily Dickinson.
Oh, relatively prosaic. That's.
Yes, it's not a bad book to have had out for 10 years. Actually, it's probably closer to 20 now.
Which library? Local?
Mm-hmm.
And your mother was a librarian?
Yes. My mother worked in the public library.
Did that keep you out or give you more incentive to go in?
It kept me there. In fact, those are some of my fondest library memories. My mother working at nights in the library, and sometimes my family would go when she was working. If she was working from 4 to 9 or whatever, we would go after school and spend the night in the library reading books. And my sister and I recall playing with the new Xerox machine, wasting our allowance in it, making copies of things, but also reading books. And I can remember where certain books were on the shelves, that I read while I was there. I can still, that map is still in my mind after all of these years of the places to.
And the combined smell of the paper and the carpeting.
I don't remember that. I do remember it had a hardwood floor. It was an old mansion that had belonged to one of the town's founders that became a library and then later a museum when the library moved into the old shopping center. So my mom's hometown has a big library now that is the size of a supermarket because it used to be a supermarket.
So how have you changed? Since we were around December 2012. I had a terrible joke about how, not even joke, about how when we last spoke, it was a day or two after the Newtown shootings. But now, of course, things are much more hopeful and pleasant in America.
Well, there was a bombing in Europe yesterday. There's no...
I think we both had a feeling that there would be some sort of reform or something. I think you were less optimistic about that than I was. But again, it was a day or so after.
I guess I would have to listen to that, to the interview. Yeah. But I think that there's never going to be a time when violence is not topical.
But you, outside of gun culture, war tattoos, and librarians, how's your life been in 4+ years?
Very good. Yeah, very good. I've worked on a lot of things. I mean, I started this book in 2014, and I've been working on roller derby portraits probably still while I was talking to you.
You mentioned it back then, yeah.
Yeah, so it's been full. I did a photo essay on the scientists who flew the New Horizons mission to Pluto and brought back all of those pictures. That one was particularly fulfilling. I liked meeting all of those people. It's behind the scenes heroes. I mean, seriously heroes. Like, these people spend their entire lives working towards a peaceful future, not just a peaceful future, but one that requires an enormous amount of intellect and intellectual concentration and cooperation too. I mean, this is our ideal society to me. Scientists.
This is the future liberals want. Remember that meme a couple of weeks ago?
Right. Wasn't that a giant muffin with chocolate on it? Yeah. So, I mean, these people spend their entire lives doing very difficult things to make really great idealistic things happen. And Newton wrote in his letter to, what's his name, Horrick, that if I have seen further, it's because I have stood on the shoulders of giants. And that letter belongs to the Philadelphia Historical Society, and you can see it in their library here in Philly. But scientists are continually working to make a colossus for everyone to stand on. And this, I believe, was the idea of the Great Library of Alexandria, of Ptolemy's library. His goal was to collect all of the knowledge in the world and put it in one place in this library. And when boats would pull it into town, police would go and they would search the boat. And if they found a book that wasn't in the library, they would take the book and they would copy it and they would give you the copy. Because Ptolemy wanted all knowledge. And he wanted to use this knowledge to build an empire. And that is what these scientists are doing now. They're using this knowledge to answer fundamental questions. I mean, when you realize that they shot a rocket off of Earth, Florida somewhere, traveled 1 billion miles, took 7 years to get there, and then it arrived 30 seconds earlier than they had predicted, not because their flight trajectory was wrong, but because the planet was bigger than they thought it was.
Yeah.
So that somebody can make that happen is magnificent. And it seems to me to dwarf all of the petty day-to-day things that people are spending their time on, like that bombing yesterday. Somebody spent time doing something destructive. And they spent time and energy and their life, ultimately, to do something bad, do something that doesn't make us better people. And so it inspires me to see scientists spending their entire lives in the shadows, unheralded for the most part, doing something that advances our knowledge even slightly.
Do you regret not going into that sort of career?
No, my math is terrible.
Everybody, yeah, but we all look at, those guys must be a different sort of human being that they can do this, but,
Yeah, I think what I'm doing is...
what you're meant to do.
Is what I'm meant to do. Yeah, if I was a scientist, I wouldn't get to hang out with roller derby players.
Probably. You're right.
I wouldn't get to hang out with all of these librarians, and I wouldn't get to hang out with all of these science fiction authors, and whatever happens next, whatever adventure I'm off on.
Yeah, is there a new project? I know the book is just out for the past week.
There's
one that you can talk about.
No,
you don't have to.
There are 2 top secret ones.
Okay. Actually, let me ask. When we talk about Ptolemy and trying to build this great library, which of course falls into disrepair and burns, etc. We have obsolescing genres and mediums and technology. You still keep your blog in LiveJournal. No, what's is that something that you're stuck with because of legacy, or you're just comfortable with the platform? Because you might be the only person I know who uses LiveJournal.
And George R. R. Martin.
Oh, true. So, this is so you guys can send DMs to each other with nobody else catching it?
I admire its efficiency. I treat my blog as sort of my personal diary, and I can go to it and see what I was doing easily, 15 years ago on this day. I can see every blog post that my friends have made in the order that they made them. No one's deciding what order anything shows up in. No
algorithm to change it on you.
Right. And it functions independently of its platform. So if I'm the only person using it, it's still just as functional to me because I can always link to this blog or that blog post. So there's no reason to move everything off of it. There's been no platform that has surpassed it for what I want to use it for. I mean, certainly Facebook is a mess. It's very popular and everybody's on it. And that's the advantage that it does have, but
that's a disadvantage at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, one of the great things, and I don't want to digress into discussions of blogging, but one of the,
sure. This show is made of digressions.
Like Tristram Shandy. One of the great things about LiveJournal was that it was in many ways the antithesis of MySpace. MySpace seemed to be a blogging platform for people with nothing to say. And LiveJournal catered towards people who did have something to say. So it was long-form blogging platform. And I have made friends on LiveJournal, and I felt that I've known intimately people's lives who I've never met just from reading their their daily or weekly posts or whatever. But I don't think I have ever made a friend on Facebook. I don't think I have ever. There was one guy on LiveJournal I remember who was a hotel manager. And you'd think he'd be a hotel manager. He was a hotel manager somewhere in the middle of the country in a tiny little hotel. And his stories were gripping of just, day-to-day life in this hotel. And I felt like I knew this guy, because I'd heard so many stories. I remembered, numerous incidents. And it was, reading the novel of somebody's life. And I never met this guy. I don't think we ever interacted, but I read his blog constantly, regularly. And that's the real wonderful thing about that platform. Facebook right now, if you make a post on Facebook, I think it's more than 2 lines or 3 lines, it cuts it off. Yeah. Right. So
read more.
Yeah. So LiveJournal gave you the opportunity to really just delve through somebody's life. And many, many times it was just like finding somebody's diary, in a stack of books somewhere. And you just sit up against a tree and you read that person's diary for the past 5 years. All of if they're good writers, they're rewarded, and you're rewarded too. Just to read detailed and uninterrupted accounts of people's lives. I mean, Facebook is all about interruptions. It's
notifications and yeah.
Well, there's like MySpace in many ways. There are many distractions on the page. It's like, oh, well, stop looking at that because this thing is flashing over here, and this person posted a video of a cat running around with a lampshade on its head. So it's trying very hard to get you not to spend time looking at one thing for too long. And what I really liked about LiveJournal was that you were the architect of your journey, and that you could spend time easily just going back through one person's entries. And also it has threaded comments, which makes things much more accessible when following a discussion.
And it doesn't tend to devolve into the "you're worse than Hitler" way that the internet tends to go.
I think it depends on what you're reading.
Yeah, imagine. I will turn you on to a past guest of mine who was the only guy who figured out the Facebook Notes function, which essentially works as like single journal entries with nice banner photo and all this stuff. He actually published a book of these, but he's the only one. Really, I don't think anyone else has figured this out in a way that's useful. So it's like little Montaigne essays he does every day. So.
I will mention, now that you mentioned that LiveJournal also had a feature called Notes, which is entirely different. But what it allows you to do is put a note next to somebody's name. So I would see your LiveJournal entry there, and it would say Gil, and next to it I would say interviewed me in 2012, and has this radio podcast. I put my own thing in there. When I would see your thing scroll up, I would remember that we had met in 2012 and again in 2017. I could add to that note. And so a lot
that weird guy from New Jersey. Yeah,
that's and a lot of times on Facebook, for years I was just accepting anybody's friend requests. So there are all these people on Facebook that I have no idea who they are. Yeah. And it's hard to sort of figure out people that I have met because there's not that functionality.
Oh, I do a mind map of guests for the show to figure out where they all come from. Which leads to some interesting nodes when you see one particular person who proliferates into, 15 other guests. You start to realize who's a social, point of contact, I guess, or who seems to facilitate this sort of stuff. But again, it's just weird phenomena that come out of doing this every week. What do you learn from teaching photography?
I have learned that the story is the most important thing, and that technical imperfections will be forgiven, and that there is no right way. There are a number of wrong ways, but that if you have a compelling story, that is almost all that matters in photography. I'm thinking about teaching a class now that would just use cell phones, just because it's the lowest common denominator, and you can eschew all of the other things you would otherwise have to learn about f-stops and apertures, and you can concentrate on finding what your story is and then telling your story.
How often do you use your phone as a camera?
6 times a day.
Okay. I had no idea. Because I think 5 years ago, this really wasn't a thing. I mean, we had cell phone cameras, we had iPhones, but the photography aspect of it really wasn't that pronounced. I think you complained at the time that people were getting into that HDR function, and then it was kind of a drag.
That's one of the many ways to do things wrong. Is to...
have there been advances in wrong things since we last...
yes. What is it? The Snapchat thing that puts the dog's nose on you. That is...
I'm
the most
incapable of understanding Snapchat because I'm not 15. But pretty much even internet gurus I've interviewed, I ask, what's the app that we weren't able to get, and this was the moment that you felt like, I just don't understand. Every single one of them is like Snapchat.
Oh,
yeah. It's not built for us to understand. So, but you're good with cell phone photography in that case. I know it's again not the same as having a whole setup, but
somewhere along the line,
I guess it goes into what the meaning of photography is for you.
In the early days of cell phone cameras, it was a challenge to try and take good pictures with a cell phone. I would say, I'm going to try and take good pictures with my cell phone. And I would go out and challenge myself. But now the cameras have gotten so good that that's not the challenge anymore. The photos on the whole are pretty good.
It's just a matter of getting a good photo of having the story, like you said.
Right. Finding the spot. I mean, photographers get paid to know where to stand, really. And so a lot of it is figuring out where you can stand to tell your story.
How long did that take you?
I still haven't figured it out.
Yeah. Kind of figured that was the case, the way you're pacing around. Let me ask about, we'll call it photojournalism.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it gives you a specific perspective on history in terms of chronicling it photographically as you've seen the last bunch of years?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you very specifically what I was doing, 8 years ago today, just by looking through my photos, which are all sorted by date.
Not personal history. I mean, historical moment. Do you look at your work and see, changes in America as we know it?
I'm not sure if I get what you mean. This is the cat wanting to back up.
Which is admirable. Cat in a lap is always good. I'm wondering if do you feel like you're documenting a continuum, I suppose? Do you feel you're getting some perspective on America as it changes over your career?
Am I adding a brushstroke to the portrait of America?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yes, I'm definitely adding a brushstroke to the...
Well answered. Perfect.
To the portrait of America. I mean, we all do it, and everybody's cell phone pictures are doing it too. Yeah, I mean, hopefully I've put some things into perspective. What I'm hoping that this book does is influence a lot of people who care about libraries, care about the idea of libraries, but maybe haven't been in a while, to try and get them to return with their attention and voices and money, if they're not going to return with their bodies and library cards, to realize that if they're not using the library, somebody else is, and that without it, we devolve into savagery. I mean, that's a little bit of hyperbole.
But we become a poorer citizenship.
We do.
How's the reception of the book been so far?
Fantastic. I have been enjoying seeing pictures, people posting of them with their copies of it. I love seeing it wrapped in library cellophane.
So I was going to ask, are there libraries, are you seeing shots in library circulation?
I am seeing a number of librarians who are in the book holding up their picture, standing in their library, which is really nice. People are sending me... I always love when somebody finds one of my books somewhere, in an airport or whatever, and sends me a picture of the book on the shelf, like it's a real thing.
It's my challenge with the show now. Any bookstore I go into, I won't leave until I see something by a past guest. And it's usually pretty easy. Roz Chast, Jules Pfeiffer, Irvin Welsh, who, by the way, has a great... You stop with the microphone leaning. Irvin Welsh has a great library story in our conversation. The guy who wrote Train Spotting grew up rough in Scotland and imaginative kid, and he used to sneak into the library so his mates wouldn't see him, because that would have been grounds for a serious ass beating. But yeah, just found himself kind of trying to get into the library at hours that his friends wouldn't quite catch, and hiding once he was in there so they wouldn't, on the off chance any of them. So eventually discovering that, it's perfectly fine. They were good with it, but yeah, there was pressure. So.
You'll never be in a bookstore that does not have a Jules Pfeiffer book.
Right. That makes it relatively easy. Sometimes I'll challenge myself to see somebody I've interviewed in the last, 8 weeks or whatever. But tell me about the SF authors. Have you made any progress with photos of science fiction authors in their writing spaces?
I am still working on that. One of the great things about that's a project called Where I Write Fantasy and Science Fiction Writers in Their Creative Spaces. One of the great things about that is that there's no deadline on it, and it fits in with whatever else I'm doing.
Yeah.
So if I'm traveling to X town, all I have to do is see who's around X town, and then...
that's what I do with this.
Right.
Stop with the nosing.
Let me point out that's the cat, not me.
Yeah. You're nosing my microphone, you son of a... but yeah, no, that's what I tie in, as we're doing today. I have business at 30th Street Station, so why don't I come over and...
Right.
In fact, I have a trade show in San Diego in a few weeks, so I'm doing a few days in LA before that to record a bunch more of these.
Yeah, so...
Any good gets recently?
The sad day, I think George might have been the last one, George R. R. Martin. I think the sad day is going to be when somebody buys that book, and then I have to stop.
Yeah. There can always be a web version that keeps going and going, but yeah, I could imagine. All those sequels.
Yeah. I had initially... I think of it as a book that will have multiple volumes. The next one might be romance writers or mystery writers or something else. And we can see, does the desk of a romance writer look different than the desk of a science fiction writer?
Depends on how successful they are. I'm just kidding. Again, given that the common denominator between us early on was Samuel Delaney, and I once tried to clean Chip's apartment, so I know from messy but successful authors. Tell me about Mr. Rogers. It's 50th anniversary of his show's debut, and I know he meant something to you, but we didn't talk about it on tape last time.
He did. He obviously, I think, meant something to everybody of my generation, but it was some number of years ago. He was being criticized by a football player, and I don't even remember the person's name. And this is the happy irony of history, I guess, that this football player who was criticizing him has vanished into obscurity. Mr. Rogers is not. He was being criticized by a football player who said he would never let his kids grow up like Fred Rogers. And I wrote to Mr. Rogers and told him that all these years later, he still meant a great deal to me. And if I had kids, I would hope they would be exactly like him. And he wrote back with some happy and encouraging words. But I think I have the same memories of him that we all do. He was a person who went out of his way to be kind. And he was a person who went out of his way to encourage kindness. Mm-hmm. And he was a person who went out of his way to tell children that they weren't wrong when they were thinking something or they were doing something or when they were asking a question, that creativity was to be encouraged. And if that was something that you weren't getting, if that was a message you weren't getting at home, you would get it from him. And I think very often that you would also get it from your librarian.
Mm-hmm. Bringing everything back full circle.
Bringing everything back.
Last question.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me continue on that while I'm thinking about it. That a school librarian is somebody who is not an administrator, and they are not a teacher. So they're a person whose only interest is the students. And I think that puts them in a particular situation to be trusted and helpful in the way that other people aren't, because they have divided loyalties.
You had just taken up running.
Oh, when
we first met.
Yeah, my wife years ago, it was 5 years ago now, almost 5 exactly. My wife was doing a play. She's an actress, and we were at some event doing a promotion for the play, and a picture of me ended up in the newspaper the next day. And I said, "Oh God, am I really that fat?" And it was horrifying. Because, when you walk past the mirror, you don't know you're a very thin person.
Oh, I've dropped 25 pounds this year. I was heading in the wrong direction.
Okay.
I can just do it without exercising. But
so I'd walk past the mirror, I'd suck my gut in, look in the mirror and be like, all right, I'm pretty good. But when I saw that picture of myself, I was like, oh gosh, there's no way to get around this. Mm-hmm. So, I drew a line in the sand. I was like, this is ending now, and I joined the gym, and I went 4 days a week, and I hated it, because you do hate it. Anyone who says otherwise is not telling the truth. And there's this poster on the wall that showed how many calories were burned by doing stuff, and running burned more calories than anything else. And I said, all right, I'm going to do that, because I want to get out of here as soon as possible. And I had a revelation during that time when I was starting to run. And I was doing it on a treadmill. And I tweeted one day that I hated nothing more than every step. Or nothing more than every step in the one before, something like that, that everything was awful. And Peter Sagal from Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, who has an essay in the book, to bring it full circle, who's also an editor at Runner's World, tweeted back that it gets better. And I thought, all right, if he said that, I will soldier through on this. And I was going to be in Chicago at some particular time in the future. And I wrote back and I said, if I can run 5K by March or whatever, would you run 5K with me when I get to Chicago? And he said, absolutely. And so I just buckled down. I was like, I'm going to get to this pinnacle. And he was right that somewhere along the way, it got better. Mm-hmm. And I realized that there aren't people getting Stationary Bicycle magazine at home. But there are people getting Runner's World magazine at home. And I realized, I'm sure not the first person to realize this, that if your goal is to lose weight, you're going to fail, because once you have lost the weight, then your goal is gone. But what you need to do is adopt a lifestyle that you enjoy, that weight loss is a part of. And so the goal then isn't to lose weight. The goal is to do better in the next race, to run farther or to run faster. And so it's been 5 years, and I have kept all of my weight off, and I have gotten faster every year. So as I age... With
the offset of age, I was going to say. Yeah.
As I age, I'm feeling younger. So every year I can run faster than the person a year ago. So it's been a wonderful journey.
First major athletic sort of thing you'd ever taken?
Absolutely, yeah. My high school was a jockocracy.
And you didn't fit in?
I was not a jock, no. And I feel bad now that I feel like I was cheated by that culture, when I realize now that I could have enjoyed it if, the coaches had been different people, right?
We'll put it that way.
If somebody had come across the hall to the theater rehearsal and said, you can be a weirdo and run cross country, it might have made a difference.
But maybe you wouldn't have ended up picking up a camera. So
right. I'm very happy to have ended up where I have ended up.
Sounds good. Kyle Cassidy, thanks so much for coming back on the Virtual Memories Show.
It's been wonderful to be here, Gil. Thank you.
And that was Kyle Cassidy. His new book is This Is What a Librarian Looks Like, a celebration of libraries, communities, and access to information. And you can find that at your favorite bookstore. You should probably implore your library to buy a copy, too. It's published by Black Dog and Leventhal, whom I've never heard of, but I think they're an imprint of a bigger publishing company in New York. Now, Kyle's website, kylecassidy.com, has links to a number of his projects, as well as that LiveJournal blog we were talking about, so you should definitely check that out. That's KYLECASSIDY.com. He's also on Twitter as Kyle Cassidy, same spelling. Now, once we wrapped up the main session, I asked Kyle, so, who are you reading? And that led into a whole other thing. If you want to hear what he had to say, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. You can do that at patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for supporters of the show, including that podcast. There's also a patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, series of ebooks I'm still hoping to get around to launching this summer, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, this one was recorded at Kyle's home in Philadelphia. My train fare was covered by my job, hence the 2-hour shouting at somebody meeting I had previously, but I'm still out of pocket for about $20-25 in cab and Uber fare to get to and from the train station. If you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, and equipment, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. A special thanks go out to Kevin Katila, John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Wallace Wilde Minozzi, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, and Ron Slate for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories Show. We've got the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. David has a reunion project going with his great 80s band David and David, who made Welcome to the Boomtown one of my favorite records. And you can find out more and support that at facebook.com/DavidandDavidMusic. And that's it for this week's Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week, but I have no goddamned idea who the guest is going to be. There were a couple of cancellations and delays, and now I am stuck without a guest for 2 episodes coming up. So if you have any ideas, and this is something you're listening to within the first day or so after I post it, let me know. I need someone to record a show with, or we're going to be dark for a week. Until next time, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store or at soundcloud.com/VMSpod. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, and at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. And if you like this show, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for this podcast. That'll help us build a bigger audience. Until next time, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.